Hello and welcome once again to the latest edition of plus-sized kite reviews, where I compare some of the best big air kites on how they boost, loop, and how confidence building they are. Today I'll be discussing what I've been up to since the last video, and of course my thoughts on the new 2024 edition of the North Orbit and the new Orbit Pro. I will mainly be comparing them to the other kites I've flown in the past 3 videos, so I certainly recommend checking them out. For those of you new to the channel, please click the like and subscribe, and check out my Instagram at jasonofmontreal for more up-to-date details on where I'm kiting and what kites I'm testing. I'm off to Cape Town in a week from now, so I'll try to put out some daily content on where the spots I'm riding are, what else is worth doing while you're there, and what kites I'll be testing on my trip. Since my last video where I rode the very delicious Cabrina Nitro, and until this North Orbit review process, I've mainly just been riding my own Duotone Evo D-Labs in sizes 8, 10, and 12, and had been, for the most part, loving them until very recently. If you've already seen my review on them and the Rebel SLS, you'll know I think the Evo D-Lab was, to date, the most high-performance kite available on the market. Since I got it, I've set multiple Woo PBs on it, and even managed to get myself up in the 30-meter club twice during the Woo Worlds. But I still don't think they are worth the added expense for the vast majority of riders, given their challenges, and for the most part that hasn't changed, because I've found my progression outside of woosting has taken a bit of a hit with them. And what's worse, since that review I have discovered there is also an additional major flaw with them: their questionable manufacturing quality and safety standard, particularly in the lines on their truss bars. After only 3 to 4 months of use, several of us who all purchased them at the same time have had center lines go on us. 2 of us while in the air in sessions blowing over 40 knots. Myself while jumping, just coming off the water, so luckily I only went up about 4 to 5 meters before crashing down. And my friend while on the descent from a 25-meter high woost, where both center lines snapped on his 3rd heli loop, while he was also still about 3 to 4 meters in the air. On both occasions, the snapped lines caused the bladders to pop, mine from the impact of the kite on the water, and the other while still up in the air, which also caused the wingtip to be torn off. We're both very lucky to have only sustained minor injuries and walked away. In the last 4 years, I've never snapped a line with my North or Core gear, so it's not really been something I've ever worried about, because I also take very good care of my gear to keep up its resale value when I swap at the end of each season. I made a post about these incidents online to see if it was just bad luck, or more common than I was aware of, and have since been bombarded with dozens of messages of people sending me photos of them experiencing the same thing, mainly with lines, but some with their SLS or D-Lab kites popping as well. And I was even sent links to forum pages going back years showing people complaining about Duotone line snapping. So this just seems to be something Duotone have decided isn't a cost-effective thing to be addressing for some reason. It's really gotten in my head the last few sessions when I'm on my Evo, and I imagine what it would have been like if these lines had have snapped right here, or up there, for example. To help get over this, and of course not throw my money down the toilet, because I did pay over 10 grand for these kites and bars, I swapped in some North lines for one of my bars and ordered some lines from the Linesmith, who comes with the highest recommendations from some pros I know. But I still have my fears about the Duotone pigtails, because we've also seen one of those snap too since we purchased the gear a few months ago. But with all that said, now let's turn to something a bit more positive, and while you're probably watching this video, my thoughts on the new Orbits and how they compare. So I'll cover the 2024 Standard Edition first, and try not to cover what I've already said about Orbits, because frankly, I've said a lot about them in the previous videos, and the long story short is, the 2024 is just another awesome addition to one of the best all-around big air kites ever made. The bar pressure is still light, the kite is very easy to use, it's one of the top 2 or 3 looping kites you can find, and of course it is one of the most powerful boosters. But in terms of straight vertical lift, it's still a slight level below the top players in the field, like the XR, Edge, Rebel, or Evo. Comparing it to the 2023 version, I feel like it has gone a fraction slower, but this seems to be a sacrifice that has been made in exchange for a significant improvement in overall stability, which, when you're riding it the way the Orbit's supposed to be written, which you might call lit as fuck, it feels like a very worthwhile trade. I ran this by my buddy who rode Orbit since 2020, and he agrees. The 2024 has a very slight reduction in response, kite speed, and a minor increase in bar pressure, but all at the cost of a very improved stability, high-end reliability, and handling in gusty winds. As someone whose favorite sessions start at 30 to 35 knots, he just loves the improvements. Here's actually a clip of him setting a bonkers new kite loop, Woo PB, on it the other day. I took out this 9 meter in a very gusty 25 to 35 or more knots, and it was so easy to jump back on, go big, and send high, well-controlled loops on almost every jump. If you are someone chasing woo scores, this is going to help you a lot on your 7, 8, and 9 meter sizes, where most moderate riders have the best chance of getting their highest jumps. I would also say that the added stability, despite being at the cost of some speed in the kite, would help a lot of riders looking to progress in their loops get more confidence for them in stronger winds. The best thing about the Orbit was already for me the confidence building factor of it, and as I've said in previous videos, there are just a lot of things I have the balls to try on these kites that I just don't on most other kites. Now, coming back to them after riding Evo D-Labs for months, the kite of course did feel heavier and slower than I remember Orbits being. So if you are used to a Lula, you will need some time adjusting, and this is probably not going to be fun in the larger sizes 10 and up. But if you are looking for a progression kite in smaller sizes like 7, 8, or 9, I think a lot of people progressing will find the Orbits much friendlier to unlocking riding in higher winds and in areas like loop progression. In terms of power, vertical lift, and hang time, the D-Lab of course has it there in terms of potential height and woosting ability. But over the course of Woo Worlds, a couple of my friends who are higher level riders and can already jump mid-20s regularly on their Orbits were borrowing the D-Labs to try to PB on them and get higher scores for our team, but they couldn't actually get higher than they were doing on their Orbits. Something which we'd also found in the past when I lent them my XR kites, or even the Cabrita Nitro I was testing. Now for me, who is more used to the D-Lab and XR, I find I can on average get about 10 to 15% higher on those kites. But if you are more tuned into an Orbit and have great technique on them, those other kites are not just going to magically boost you higher without either a bit of practice or some lucky gusts. When you combine the fear of line snapping I have with my Duotone kites now, I'm not really sure the bonus woo potential you would unlock with the D-Lab is really worth it given the risks and safety in extreme big air conditions. Certainly in the larger sizes, for lighter winds where the risks are not so great, the advantages with the Evo of the low end and kite performance are still fabulous of course, if you don't mind the extra price tag. But let's get on to the Orbit Pro. So let's start with what people really want to know. Is it the best Orbit yet? The answer is definitely. But is it the best Orbit for everybody? And the answer is probably not. This kite is called the Pro for a reason, and it rides like it. The noticeable improvements from the standard Orbit that it is lighter, quicker, and more responsive, which of course means an overall improvement in the total potential performance, but I do feel like this came at a slight cost with its stability and ease of use for the average rider, particularly in stronger, gustier winds. An experienced rider is not going to suffer these issues, however, but with reduced weight and increased speed, everything will feel a little less stable, of course. There is a noticeable increase in power and a slight decrease in bar pressure, which is a lovely combination, but it's hard to know how much of that power is from the speed of the kite, because of course when you jump, the faster the kite moves to 12, the higher you'll go. You'll notice in a number of my clips the kite shooting forward rapidly, which is great if you can time it with your boost, but also can be a real challenge to not overfly the kite. And that also means it will take a bit of getting used to on scent jumps and heli loops if you're used to a standard Orbit, or any other slower moving kite. Once you get the hang of that speed and movement pattern, of course, it's bloody lovely, and more similar to the D-Lab in that regard. This power doesn't translate quite as much to the loops because the kite moves so quickly around. I found I was looping the kite quite high and tight for the first dozen or so loops, and with only 2 sessions on it, I did find it rather challenging to get the kite lower into the big power zone, so there wasn't a ton of yank on them. This is great, however, for progressing, of course, because you know that the kite isn't as aggressive, it can build a little confidence in your looping, and you know it's always going back up to 12 to catch you. You can tell this kite was designed for the modern comp level riding because it must be a monster for double loops with how fast it gets around, and the improved response with less pressure makes it a lot easier to control with one hand, leaving the other free for grabs or board offs, etc. In terms of jumping high and woosting, this kite definitely has an edge on the standard orbit, mainly because of its speed, but I think most riders will struggle to get those benefits right away because they will be oversending the kite a lot, or struggling to control the kite and they're edging at the same time when they're getting powered up. I would suggest, unless you already have your big kite loops on lock and are confident riding super lit, jumping over 15 to 20 meters on the regular, the advantage of the Pro versus the standard orbit are likely to hinder your progress. Personally, I think I might actually prefer the standard in sizes 8 or smaller. I love either of the 9s, and then in 10 and up, I definitely want the Pro. The kite also comes with 2-meter line extensions, which is pretty cool. I still prefer 22s when I'm super lit, but I have rode 24s quite a bit in lighter winds to get a bit more hang time and height when I'm on larger kites. I don't feel like I have quite the same control on it with 8 or 9 meter kites, so I stick to the familiar 22s when it's extreme big air time. Although I have had fun on shorter lines with orbits in the past as well, it's something I don't have the balls to try with D-Labs because of how fast and angry they ride. Comparing it to the recent kites I've been riding, with the Nitro, it does feel a bit like North Team rode it a bunch of times and said hold my beer, because it does take some of that faster, slightly boostier than the 23 orbit DNA the Nitro has, and throw that and then some into the Pro model. So I can't wait to see how Cabrino responds next. And versus my D-Labs, it's still not an Alula kite, of course, so the kite is a bit slower and heavier in general feel and bar pressure, and doesn't have the same vertical lift. But the loops are much friendlier, and the kite in general just feels safer and more durable from the bar to the kite. So this has me questioning all my recent Duotone purchases, because I think outside of woosting, the overall riding experience of the Orbit Pro in big air could be as much fun, at least in the smaller sizes. Once you have moved to an Alula kite, it is really hard to go back, especially with the fear of their resale value now you've made the financial commitment you were hoping was going to last you at least a couple of seasons. But this kite does make a very compelling argument, especially if you haven't already made the sacrifice. In terms of scores, not a lot of change from the 2023 to the 2024 Orbit, but a little more movement around for the Pro, of course, because of the new performance boost. But of course, the challenges I think most riders will struggle to benefit from. So in summary, I just love this kite, but I think for most riders looking to up their big air game and progress in their loops, stick to the standard 2024, because it's also amazing. Now if you're around my level or higher, then I think the Pro is the next logical step forward, unless you really want to splash out and take the gamble on something Alula. I really hope to see what North could do if they took on the apparent challenges Alula bring, but in the meantime, I'm hoping to fly some more of the brand's new kites while I'm on holiday in Cape Town, so if you are connected to a brand and want me to get on something for a video, please get in touch. Thank you all for taking the time to get this far in the video. Please throw on any comments or questions you have below, because I do read and try to respond to them all, and I look forward to testing some new kites and putting out some more content in the very near future. Bye-bye.